Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe and support me. The moon hung low over the shadowed land of Ebenfall, casting an eerie silver glow on the ancient cemetery where Dax conducted his nightly rituals. Cloaked in darkness, he moved silently among the tombstones, his eyes reflecting the restless souls he commanded. Tonight, he sought a particularly elusive spirit, a rogue entity that had been haunting the nearby village, sowing terror among its inhabitants. Murmuring an incantation in a forgotten tongue, Dax extended his hands over a weathered grave. Tendrils of ethereal energy seeped from his fingertips, weaving through the air like smoke. A faint wail echoed as the rogue spirit materialized, its form shifting and flickering. With a swift motion, Dax bound the spirit, adding it to the legion of souls tethered to his will. Restless even in death, he whispered, a hint of melancholy in his voice. Despite his fearsome reputation as the soul hunter, moments like these weighed on him. The power to command the dead was both a gift and a curse, a means to protect Ebenfall, but at the cost of his own humanity. As he left the cemetery, hushed conversations from the nearby tavern reached his ears. Tales of his exploits were common fare among villagers, a mix of awe and fear. Some saw him as a necessary shield against darker forces, others whispered that he was no different from the malevolent entities he pursued. Crossing the cobblestone streets, Dax felt a familiar chill crawl up his spine. A messenger spirit materialized before him, its translucent form pulsating with urgency. Dax, it intoned, its voice echoing as if from a great distance. What news do you bring? He asked, his eyes narrowing. Malachi has begun gathering the lost soul fragments. He seeks to summon Umbra, the forbidden god. A surge of dread coursed through him. Umbra, a deity banished eons ago for attempting to consume all souls, disrupting the very fabric of life and death. The thought of such a being returning was unthinkable. Where is he now? Dax demanded. The fragments point to the Whispering Woods. Time grows short. With that, the messenger faded into the night, leaving Dax alone with the weight of impending doom. Memories of his past, of loss and pain inflicted by dark magic, flooded back, fueling his resolve. He knew he had to act. The next morning, Dax made his way to the outskirts of Ebenfall, seeking the one person who might aid him despite their complicated history. Lysandra's cottage stood amidst a garden of wildflowers, a stark contrast to the bleakness he was accustomed to. He hesitated before knocking, uncertain of his reception. The door creaked open, revealing Lysandra's cautious gaze. Her emerald eyes widened slightly at the sight of him. Dax, to what do I owe this unexpected visit? I need your help, he said plainly. She raised an eyebrow. Necromancers rarely seek the aid of healers. What's changed? Malachi aims to summon Umbra. He's collecting soul fragments. I can't stop him alone. Lysandra studied him for a moment, her expression unreadable. And why should I trust you? Because if he succeeds, Ebenfall will fall into eternal darkness. Whatever differences we have, we both want to prevent that. She sighed softly. Very well. Come inside. The interior of her home was warm and inviting, filled with the scent of herbs and the soft glow of candlelight. It was a stark reminder of the light he had long been absent from. They sat across from each other at a wooden table as Dax explained the situation in detail. The Whispering Woods are treacherous, Lysandra noted, filled with illusions and spirits even you might find challenging. I'm aware, he replied. But it's our only lead. She nodded thoughtfully. I'll help you, but on one condition. Name it. You must promise to free any souls you've bound once this is over. Dax hesitated. The souls he commanded were his strength, his shield. Releasing them would leave him vulnerable. But the earnest look in Lysandra's eyes compelled him. Agreed, he said finally. They set out at dusk, the sky ablaze with hues of orange and purple before fading into night. The Whispering Woods loomed at a dense expanse of twisted trees and ethereal mists. As they entered, faint whispers brushed against their ears, unintelligible but unsettling. Stay close, Dax cautioned. The path ahead was barely visible, obscured by fog that seemed almost alive. Shadows danced at the edges of their vision, and the air grew thick with enchantment. Suddenly, spectral figures emerged from the mist, apparitions with hollow eyes and outstretched hands. Lysandra began to chant, her healing magic forming a protective barrier around them. Dax summoned his bound souls, directing them to fend off the onslaught of spirits. The clash of energies illuminated the darkness, casting eerie lights across the trees. As they pressed forward, the illusions intensified. Visions of the past materialized, loved ones lost, failures endured. Dax saw the faces of those he'd consigned to servitude, their eyes filled with accusation. "Is this the price you pay for power?" Lysandra's voice broke through the haze, her gaze fixed on him. He faltered, the weight of her question piercing deeper than any blade. "I do what I must." "At what cost?" She pressed. "You're teetering on the same edge as Malachi." Her words stung because they echoed his own hidden fears. Before he could respond, a towering figure blocked their path, a guardian of the forest, its form composed of intertwining branches and shadow. "Turn back," it rumbled, "or be consumed." "We seek passage to stop Malachi," Dax declared. "Let us through." The guardian's eyes glowed with ancient wisdom. "Prove your intent is pure." Without warning, it launched a barrage of dark tendrils toward them. Dax reacted instinctively, unleashing a wave of necrotic energy. The guardian absorbed the attack, seemingly unfazed. Lysandra stepped forward, her hands emanating a soft light. "Let me try," she said. She began to sing a haunting melody that resonated with the very soul of the forest. The guardian hesitated, the aggression fading from its stance. The tendrils receded. "Your harmony soothes the forest's pain," it acknowledged. "You may pass." As they moved deeper into the woods, Dax glanced at Lysandra. "Impressive." "Not everything requires force," she replied gently. "Sometimes, healing is stronger than destruction." Her words lingered in his mind as they reached a clearing where the trees parted to reveal a stone altar. Upon it lay a fragment pulsating with dark energy, a piece of the lost souls Malachi sought. "We need to secure it before his followers arrive," Dax said, stepping toward the altar. But as his fingers grazed the fragment, a searing pain shot through him. Visions flooded his mind, glimpses of Umbra's return, the world engulfed in shadow, and himself standing beside Malachi, corrupted and unrecognizable. He recoiled, breathing heavily. It's tainted." Lysandra placed a hand on his shoulder. "Let me." She wrapped the fragment in a cloth inscribed with protective runes, the dark pulsations dimming. "We have to destroy it." "Destroying it here will alert Malachi," Dax warned. "We need a safe place." A rustling sounded from the trees. Shadows moved with intent. "Too late," Lysandra whispered. Malachi's minions emerged, a horde of twisted creatures, their bodies warped by dark magic. Leading them was a figure draped in tattered robes, his eyes gleaming with malice. "Dax," the figure sneered. "Always meddling." "Rail," Dax spat. "Still playing lapdog to Malachi?" Rail laughed coldly. "Hand over the fragment, and perhaps we'll spare your lives." "Not a chance," Dax replied, summoning his remaining souls. A fierce battle erupted. Dax and Lysandra fought side by side, the necromancy and healing arts intertwining in a desperate struggle. Despite their efforts, the tide began to turn against them. Outnumbered and overpowered, they were forced to retreat. "This way," Lysandra called, leading them toward a narrow path concealed by underbrush. They stumbled through the dark until they reached the edge of the woods, the sounds of pursuit fading behind them. Exhausted, they collapsed beneath an ancient oak. "We can't keep this up," Dax admitted, frustration evident in his voice. "He's always one step ahead." Lysandra looked at him, her expression a mix of concern and determination. "Then we need to change our approach." He met her gaze. "What do you suggest?" "Trust me," she said softly. "Let me help you carry this burden." For a moment, he considered the walls he'd built, at the isolation, the reliance on forbidden arts. Perhaps it was time to let someone in. "All right," he agreed. What's our next move? Dax gazed into the depths of the forest, the weight of their predicament pressing heavily upon him. The moonlight filtered through the canopy, casting dappled shadows across Lysandra's determined face. He took a deep breath, feeling the chill night air fill his lungs. What's our next move? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Lysandra leaned closer, her eyes reflecting a quiet confidence. We need to disrupt Malachi's connection to the soul fragments. If we can sever his link, he'll lose the power he's amassed. He considered her words. But to do that, we'd need to get Closia dangerously close. Exactly, she replied. But I believe there's a way to shield us from his sight. Dax raised an eyebrow. How? She reached into a pouch at her waist and pulled out a small vial containing a shimmering liquid. This is essence of veil root. It can cloak us from dark magic for a short time. He nodded slowly. And you just happen to have this with you? She offered a faint smile. I like to be prepared. A hint of admiration flickered in his eyes. Alright, then we head to Shadow's Pyre. That's where he'll be performing the summoning. There's one more thing, Lysandra added, her tone turning serious. You need to let go of the souls you've bound. He tensed. We had a deal after this is over. If you carry them into Shadow's Pyre, Malachi can manipulate them against you, she warned. They're a liability now. Dax clenched his jaw, the thought of releasing his only defense unnerving. But deep down, he knew she was right. Fine, he conceded. But I'll need your help. She placed a reassuring hand on his arm. We'll do it together. They spent the next hour performing a release ritual. One by one, the bound souls emerged, their forms ethereal and wavering. Dax spoke words of absolution, his voice steady despite the turmoil within. As each soul departed, a strange lightness settled over him, a liberation he hadn't anticipated. When the last soul vanished into the night sky, Dax sank to his knees, a mixture of exhaustion and relief washing over him. Lysandra knelt beside him. How do you feel? He met her gaze. Empty. But also free. She smiled softly. Sometimes letting go is the first step toward healing. He gave a faint nod, rising to his feet. We should get moving. Dawn isn't far off. The journey to Shadow's Pyre was fraught with tension. Without his legion of souls, Dax felt exposed. Yet, there was a clarity in his mind that hadn't been there before, a focus unmarred by the whispers of the dead. As they approached the ruins, the landscape grew increasingly desolate. The air thickened with a palpable malevolence, and the ground was scarred by fissures emitting tendrils of dark energy. Lysandra uncorked the vial of essence of veil root. This will only last an hour, she cautioned. We need to be swift. They each took a sip, the liquid leaving a cool sensation as it flowed down their throats. Instantly, the oppressive weight of the dark magic around them lessened, as if a veil had been drawn between them and the shadowy forces. Silently, they slipped into the ruins. Crumbling walls and shattered columns bore the marks of ancient battles. At the heart of Shadow's Pyre stood the temple, a towering structure with jagged spires reaching toward the storm-laden sky. From within, they heard the ominous chants of Malachi and his acolytes. The air vibrated with the resonance of their incantations, and a swirling vortex of darkness formed above the temple. We need to disrupt the ritual circle, Lysandra whispered. If we can break its integrity, the summoning will fail. Dax surveyed the area. There are too many of them. We can't fight our way through. Maybe we don't have to, she suggested. If we can create a diversion, draw them away from the circle. He considered the idea. I can use illusion magic to create a phantom army approaching from the east. She nodded. And while they investigate, we slip in from the west. Time was of the essence. Dax focused his energy, weaving a complex illusion of warriors emerging from the mist. The phantom figures moved with purpose, weapons gleaming menacingly. Almost immediately, shouts rang out from the temple. Malachi's minions scrambled to respond, a swarm of dark-robed figures rushing toward the illusory threat. Now, Lysandra urged. They darted through the shadows, making their way toward the temple's entrance. Inside, The atmosphere was stifling. The walls were inscribed with arcane symbols that pulsed with each beat of the ritual. At the center of the chamber, Malachi stood within a circle etched into the stone floor. The soul fragments hovered around him, connected by streams of dark energy. His eyes were closed, his hands raised as he chanted in a guttural language. "Stay here," Dax whispered. "I'll disrupt the circle." Before Lysandra could protest, he stepped forward, careful to avoid the lines of the ritual markings. Just as he reached the edge of the circle, Malachi's eyes snapped open. "Dax," he drawled, a sinister smile spreading across his face. "I wondered when you'd arrive." Dax's heart pounded. "It's over, Malachi." "Stand down." Malachi chuckled. "Over? It's only just beginning. Join me, and together we'll command power beyond imagination." "Never," Dax spat. "I won't let you unleash Umbra." "Won't you?" Malachi's gaze intensified. "I can feel the darkness within you." "You crave power as much as I do." Dax hesitated, a flicker of doubt creeping in. Malachi seized the moment, extending a hand. "Embrace your true nature. With Umbra's return, we can reshape the world." Behind him, Lysandra watched anxiously, sensing the internal battle waging within Dax. She began to weave a protective spell, hoping to shield him from Malachi's influence. "Think of it, Dax," Malachi pressed. "No more hiding in shadows. No more limits. Together, we can transcend mortality itself." Images flashed through Dax's mind at the allure of limitless power, the ability to right every wrong, to bring back those he'd lost. The temptation was overwhelming. But then he felt a warm but gentle presence countering the cold grasp of darkness. Lysandra's spell enveloped him, her voice echoing softly in his mind. "Remember who you are." Clarity pierced through the fog of temptation. Dax straightened, his resolve hardening. "I am not like you," he declared. "I choose a different path." Malachi's expression twisted into a snarl. "Then you will perish with the rest of them." He unleashed a bolt of dark energy. Dax narrowly dodged, the blast shattering the stone pillar behind him. The chamber shook, debris raining down. Lysandra stepped forward, joining Dax's side. Together, they faced Malachi, a united front against the encroaching darkness. "Foolish," Malachi hissed, "you cannot hope to defeat me." "We don't need to defeat you," Lysandra retorted, "just stop you." She raised her hands, casting a beam of light that collided with Malachi's dark aura. The clash of energies sent shock waves rippling through the chamber. Dax seized the opportunity to strike at the ritual circle. He drew a dagger and carved a deep line across one of the key symbols etched into the floor. The effect was immediate as the soul fragments flickered, their connection to Malachi weakening. "No!" Malachi roared, his focus breaking. The vortex above began to destabilize, swirling erratically. Dax continued to disrupt the circle, each strike further unraveling the ritual. Realizing his plan was collapsing, Malachi summoned all his power, directing a torrent of dark magic toward Dax. Lysandra intercepted it with a barrier of light, but the force was immense. Cracks formed in the shield as she struggled to maintain it. "Dax, hurry!" she cried out. With a final slash, Dax severed the last line of the circle. The soul fragments erupted in a burst of energy, scattering like stars across the chamber. The vortex overhead imploded, sending a shock wave that knocked everyone off their feet. Malachi staggered, disbelief etched across his face. "You meddlesome wretch!" He lunged at Dax, dark blades forming in his hands. They clashed, sparks flying as steel met shadow. Dax fought fiercely, but without his necromantic powers, he was at a disadvantage. Lysandra, regaining her footing, searched for a way to tip the scales. Her eyes fell upon the remnants of the soul fragments, now glowing faintly on the ground. An idea sparked. She began to chant, drawing upon the residual energy. Gathering the fragments, she melded them into a concentrated orb of light. "Dax, get clear." Trusting her instinct, he broke away from the fight, diving aside just as Lysandra released the orb toward Malachi. The orb struck him squarely, enveloping him in a blinding radiance. Malachi screamed, his form flickering between solid and ethereal. The light intensified, consuming him from within. "This isn't over," he howled before exploding into a cascade of fading shadows. Silence settled over the chamber, broken only by the distant rumble of the collapsing temple. Dax and Lysandra exchanged weary glances. "Is he?" Dax began. "Banished," Lysandra confirmed, "at least for now." The ground beneath them trembled. "We need to get out of here," Dax urged. They raced toward the exit as the temple crumbled around them. Stones crashed down, dust choking the air. Just as they reached the threshold, a massive slab fell, blocking their path. "Hold on," Dax shouted. He pushed against the stone with all his might, but it wouldn't budge. Lysandra placed her hands on the slab, her eyes closing in concentration. A soft glow emanated from her palms, and slowly, the stone began to lift. Together, they slipped through the opening, tumbling onto the steps outside as the temple collapsed entirely behind them. They lay there for a moment, catching their breath under the open sky. The storm clouds had parted, revealing the first light of dawn. "It's over," Lysandra sighed. Dax sat up, gazing at the horizon. "For now." She looked at him thoughtfully. "What will you do next?" He considered the question. The weight of his past actions pressed upon him, but there was also a newfound sense of possibility. "I need to make amends. Find a way to use my knowledge for good." She smiled gently. "I think that's a wise choice." He met her eyes. Would you be willing to help me?" Her expression softened. "Of course. We can learn from each other." He extended a hand, which she accepted warmly. "Then let's begin." In the weeks that followed, Dax and Lysandra traveled across ebb and flow, aiding villages afflicted by remnants of Malachi's influence. Together, they cleansed corrupted lands, healed the sick, and guided lost spirits to rest. Word of their deeds spread, painting a new image of the once feared soul hunter. People began to greet Dax with gratitude rather than fear, their trust slowly blossoming. One evening, as they sat by a campfire under a canopy of stars, Lysandra glanced at him. "You've changed. You know." He poked at the fire with a stick. "I couldn't have done it without you." She shook her head lightly. "You chose this path. I merely walked it with you." He smiled softly. "Then I'm grateful you did." A comfortable silence settled between them, the crackling of the fire mingling with the distant sounds of the night. "Do you ever think about what might have happened if we hadn't stopped Malachi?" she asked. "Sometimes," he admitted. "But dwelling on the past won't help us move forward." She nodded in agreement. "You're right. There's still much to do." He looked into the flames. "I've been thinking. Maybe we could establish a sanctuary, a place where magic is used to heal and protect, not control." Her eyes lit up. "That's a wonderful idea. A haven for those seeking guidance." "Will you help me build it?" he asked. She reached over and squeezed his hand. Every step of the way. Years later, the sanctuary of Ebenfall stood as a beacon of hope. Mages, healers, and scholars gathered to share knowledge and foster harmony between magic and the world. Under Dax and Lysandra's guidance, it became a place where past transgressions were forgiven, and new beginnings were embraced. One afternoon, as Dax watched apprentices practice healing spells in the courtyard, he felt a profound sense of peace. The shadows that once clung to him had faded, replaced by a lightness he hadn't thought possible. Lysandra approached, her eyes reflecting the same contentment. "They're making great progress," she remarked. He smiled. "They're eager to learn." "It's inspiring." She tilted her head thoughtfully. "You've come a long way from the soul hunter." He chuckled softly. "I suppose I have. But I couldn't have done it alone." She linked her arm with his. "Nor could I." They strolled through the gardens, the air filled with the scent of blooming flowers and the laughter of students. The past was a distant memory, overshadowed by the promise of the future they were building together. As the sun began to set, casting golden hues across the sanctuary, Dax felt a deep gratitude, not just for his redemption, but for the journey that led him here. The trials, the sacrifices, and the unwavering belief that even in darkness, light could be found. Turning to Lysandra, he said, "Thank you for everything." She looked up at him, her eyes warm. "We're partners, remember?" "In all things," he nodded, content. "In all things." Together, they watched as the stars emerged one by one, each a reminder that even the smallest light could shine brightly against the vastness of the night.